I smelled smoke before I even saw it, and when I did, I nearly spat out my morning coffee all over the kitchen window. There she was, Karen, my next-door nightmare, spinning like a proud pioneer woman next to a roaring bonfire pit built slap dab in the middle of my east pasture. My pasture, not hers. And she wasn't just toasting marshmallows. Oh no. She had a whole party going. Kids running around with flaming sticks like sugar-high gremlins, a folding table overloaded with hot dogs and chips, and Karen herself standing there like the queen of Smoky Mountain, flipping burgers on a portable grill. I stood frozen, coffee mug halfway to my mouth, watching the whole circus unfold. Did she not see the big old fence? The posted signs? Or was she actually this bold? It felt like I had accidentally tuned into a reality TV show where the villain moved in next door and set up camp. Literally. After about 20 stunned seconds, I stormed out onto the porch and hollered across the pasture, "Hey, Karen, what in the world is going on?" She barely flinched, just waved like we were at a church potluck. "Oh, hi, sweetie. Don't mind us. Just a little community gathering. You know how it is." The audacity. The sheer nerve. I could barely process it. I marched down the field, boots crunching against dry grass, heart hammering. When I got closer, I saw the pit wasn't just a casual circle of rocks. It was a full-on stone-lined fire pit with logs stacked taller than a toddler. There were even lawn chairs arranged around it like they'd been planning this for weeks. I pointed to the fence line. "Karen, this is my property. This is my land." She blinked at me, feigned confusion like she was auditioning for a soap opera, and then laughed. "Oh honey, land is meant to be shared. Besides, you barely use this part." I felt my jaw go slack. Shared? Since when does shared mean I build things on your land without asking? I tried reasoning. I tried pointing out the survey stakes, and even offered to show her the deed. Karen just smiled wider, like a cat who already swallowed the canary. "I'm sure we can figure it out later," she said, handing a kid a lighter and sending him off to light tiki torches. As I stood there blinking, trying to process whether this was real life or some prank show, a few of the neighborhood HOA board members arrived, waving at Karen like she was their queen. One even patted her on the back and said, "You outdid yourself this time, Karen." That's when the sinking realization hit me. Karen wasn't just having a spur-of-the-moment barbecue, she was hosting a full-blown, planned-to-the-last-detail neighborhood bonfire party. On my property. Without asking. Without permission. Without even the courtesy of telling me. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that fire pit glowing, flames licking up into the night sky, dancing just feet away from the dry woods and tall grass that bordered my pasture. It was reckless, stupid, dangerous, and above all, illegal. I dug through my old files and pulled out the property map, double-checking every line. Sure enough, Karen's little party pit was planted dead center on my side. The next morning, I returned to the scene hoping the whole thing had been a bad dream, but there it was. Not only was the pit still there, but Karen had now put up string lights and laid out coolers packed with drink. She was preparing for the big event. When I tried confronting her again, she pulled the most Karen move I'd ever witnessed. "Relax, sweetie." I cleared it with the HOA. My stomach sank. Karen was on the HOA. Of course she was. She practically ran the thing. She must have pulled strings, lied, or just not mentioned the minor detail that the land wasn't even hers. I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere by arguing with her directly. The woman had the stubbornness of a mule and the charm of a used car dealer who's just spotted a gullible customer. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I spotted a clipboard left sitting on one of the tables. My curiosity got the better of me, and I flipped through it while Karen was busy taking selfies with the other board members. It was a full guest list, schedule, and, get this, a list of fireworks deliveries and equipment rentals. This wasn't some casual cookout. Karen was planning a massive bonfire party complete with fireworks, alcohol, and about 50 guests. All of it on my land. All of it with no permit. All of it during what the local news had been calling the driest, most fire-prone season in years. I walked back to my house in a daze, clutching the clipboard like it was a bomb. Because in a way it was. The whole situation was one spark away from blowing up, literally. And I knew one thing for sure. Karen was going to push this until someone, or something, stopped her. And I had a pretty good idea of who that someone would be. Me. But I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make sure she'd regret ever planting that bonfire on my land. The bonfire might have been her idea, but she had no idea what kind of fire she was actually starting. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. Not the soft, distant kind you hear when someone's fixing a fence, but the aggressive, full-swing, slap-it-together kind. I threw on my boots and trudged back to the pasture, coffee in hand, only to find Karen, still wearing yesterday's enthusiasm and a suspiciously professional tool belt, directing two teenage boys as they expanded the fire pit. Expanded. As if trespassing, building, and setting up for a fire hazard wasn't enough, she had doubled the size of the pit overnight. Now there were heavy stones being laid in a second ring, firewood stacked like it was a lumberyard, and folding chairs multiplying like rabbits. I almost laughed from disbelief, but the dry crackle of the tall grass under my boots reminded me this wasn't funny at all. I called out, trying one more time, hoping reason might work. Karen spun around, hands on her hips, flashing that fake neighborly smile. "Oh, you again. Don't worry, darling. The HOA board said it's fine. Besides, we all need to blow off some steam these days." I could feel the heat rise in my face, and it wasn't from the bonfire. "Karen," I said carefully, "this is my land. You didn't get permission. You didn't get a permit. And you didn't ask." Her expression barely flickered. "Oh, honey, you've been hogging this field for years. Don't you think it's time to let the community enjoy it a little? It's practically part of the neighborhood." The level of entitlement was staggering, but what rattled me more was that the two HOA board members sipping lemonade by the pit nodded in agreement like we were all one big happy family who just forgot to invite me. Frustrated, I decided to take a different route. I went back inside, pulled out every document I owned, and flipped through the property lines, land surveys, and title deed. All of them confirmed the same thing. It was unquestionably my land. There was no shared ownership, no HOA easement, no community use clause. Karen had simply decided it was hers because it suited her. I even called the county office, just to be sure. The clerk chuckled when I explained it and said, "Yeah, sounds like you got yourself a classic case of boundary blindness. Happens more than you'd think." Not exactly reassuring, but at least I wasn't losing my mind. Still, I knew better than to rely on paperwork alone. Karen wasn't the type to fold under fact. That afternoon, I started documenting everything. I took photos of the pit, the chairs, the expanding firewood stacks, the string lights, and the rented sound equipment Karen had sneakily tucked under a tarp. I even snapped pictures of the guest list clipboard when Karen wasn't looking. She had left it sitting on a table again, as if daring someone to call her bluff. The list wasn't small. There were at least 50 names on it, and next to the names, little notes. Bring drinks, bring fireworks, don't tell anyone it's technically on someone else's property. That last note was scribbled next to the DJ's name, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. Thinking ahead, I checked the county's fire safety website, and there it was, bold as day, a fire ban advisory for the entire region. No open flames, no fireworks, no bonfires, period. The risk of wildfire was too high with the recent drought. I took screenshots, printed it out, and added it to my growing file of evidence. I even swung by the fire department to have a quiet chat. The fire chief, a no-nonsense woman named Dolores, listened patiently as I laid out the situation. When I mentioned Karen's name, Dolores sighed. "Karen Morrison? HOA Karen? Yeah, I've heard the name. You're not the first." That sent a chill down my spine. Just how many stunts had this woman pulled? The problem was, I wasn't just up against Karen. I was up against the HOA too. Karen practically ran it. She was the treasurer, event planner, and unofficial queen bee of the neighborhood. They turned a blind eye to her antics because, frankly, they were too afraid to cross her. She wielded HOA fines like a sheriff in an old western. Parking violations, lawn length citations, unauthorized fence complaints, you name it, Karen had fined someone for it. But now she was the one breaking rules, and everyone was too scared or too cozy with her to care. That night, I watched from my porch as more decorations went up. Karen's crew had set up tiki torches, extra folding tables, and what looked like a rented margarita machine. I could hear snippets of conversation drifting through the wind. Someone mentioned fireworks arriving the next day. Another laughed about how nobody would dare report Karen. They were all so confident, so sure they could dance right up to the edge of disaster without consequence. And honestly, I might have let it slide if it were just a silly party. But with a drought this bad, with fire risks high enough to trigger county-wide bans, it wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. Still, I needed more than anger. I needed a plan. I called around quietly, spoke to a few neighbors I trusted, and found out I wasn't alone. Turns out, Karen had been rubbing folks the wrong way for years. She'd cut through properties without permission, borrowed tools without returning them, and pulled off surprise parties that left other yards trashed. People were just too intimidated to push back. But now, with fire involved, the stakes were too high. A neighbor named Paul even whispered, "If you can stop her this time, you'll be doing the whole neighborhood a favor." I knew I couldn't go in half-cocked. Karen was bold, but reckless. She relied on people backing down. What she didn't know was that I wasn't the backing down type. I went to bed that night with a folder full of evidence, a phone full of photos, and a head full of plans. Tomorrow was the big party. Tomorrow, Karen would light the first spark. And I'd be ready, waiting to make sure it was also her last. The morning of the party arrived with an eerie calm. The kind of stillness that you just know is going to break into chaos by sundown. I sat on my porch with my coffee, watching as Karen's crew scurried about, decorating the place like they were setting up for a county fair. Balloons, banners, and those ridiculous flamingo lawn ornaments were being stabbed into the ground like it was some festive invasion. But what unsettled me most wasn't the decor, it was the stack of boxes marked fireworks being unloaded from the back of a pickup truck. Illegal, obviously, and enough to make my stomach twist. They had no idea how fast this entire patch of land could go up in flames with one bad spark. I knew, though, and so did the fire marshal I had spoken to the night before. Karen, of course, was the picture of smug satisfaction, strutting around like a self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. She wore one of those wide-brimmed sun hats and a sash that read "Hostess with the Mostest," as if that would protect her from trespassing laws. Guests started arriving in droves. Cars lined the dirt road, blocking driveways, including mine, because naturally, Karen's invitation had included the words, "Overflow parking available next door," which apparently meant my front lawn. I watched with a clenched jaw as strangers trampled across my property like it was some public park, dragging coolers, folding chairs, and toddlers who clearly had more sense than their parents, judging by the way they looked nervously at the pit. The real kicker came when I overheard Karen, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear, joking, "I told the HOA president not to worry. We've got our bases covered. Besides, if anyone complains, it's just old Grumpy next door. She never joins in on anything fun." The crowd laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. It wasn't funny. It was insulting. But it was also predictable. Karen's confidence was her weakness. She genuinely believed no one would dare cross her. What she didn't know was that I had crossed every T and dotted every I. I had the fire marshal, the sheriff's department, and the county zoning office all briefed and ready. By the time the sun dipped low, the party was in full swing. Music blared from speakers big enough to shake my windows. Kids ran wild, some dangerously close to the fire pit, which was now roaring with flames far taller than Karen's supposed safety guidelines allowed. Drunken adults lit sparklers, waved them like magic wands, and a few brave souls started prepping the first batch of fireworks despite the county-wide ban. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, waiting. Every instinct told me to storm over there and shut it down myself, but I didn't have to. I had timed this just right. Right as the first firework was lit, sending a shrieking trail of sparks into the darkening sky, the night lit up with more than just fireworks. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees, followed by the unmistakable wail of sirens. Karen's smile faltered mid-sentence as 3 fire trucks and 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up like the cavalry arriving at the last second. The music screeched to a halt. Conversations died mid-laugh. Guests froze, clutching their drinks as if that might somehow make them invisible. Dolores, the fire chief, climbed out of the lead truck, helmet tucked under her arm, looking every bit like she had personally come to rain on this parade. She scanned the scene, taking in the bonfire, the fireworks, the crowd, and finally landed her gaze on Karen. "Ma'am," she said, calm but firm, "we've had multiple reports of an illegal fire, fireworks during a burn ban, and unauthorized use of private property. Care to explain?" Karen stammered, clearly scrambling to salvage the situation. "Oh, there must be a mistake. The HOA approved it. And, it's just a small gathering." Dolores raised an eyebrow, pointing at the towering bonfire, the fireworks littered across the grass, and the dozens of wide-eyed partygoers. "Small, huh?" Karen's face went pale as a deputy stepped forward with a citation pad. The guests started backing away, some conveniently remembering that they had early mornings ahead. A few even mouthed apologies to me as they shuffled off. The fire crew wasted no time dousing the bonfire, their hoses sending steam and smoke billowing into the night sky. What struck me most was the silence from the HOA board members, who stood to the side pretending they had never met Karen in their lives. As Karen tried to plead her case, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, Dolores calmly flipped through the evidence I had provided earlier. Photos, map, the printed fire ban notice, the guest list with "Don't tell anyone" scribbled next to fireworks. Karen's confidence crumbled with every page. The deputy didn't just write one citation. He wrote several. Trespassing, fire code violations, endangering public safety, unauthorized use of private property, illegal fireworks possession. Karen's jaw practically unhinged when she saw the grand total of the fines. And just when I thought the evening couldn't get any sweeter, one of the deputies leaned in and said, "By the way, the HOA president already confirmed they had no knowledge of this event. Seems someone forgot to mention it at the last meeting." Karen spun to look at the HOA board, but they had strategically dispersed into the crowd, avoiding eye contact like rats leaving a sinking ship. One by one, guests slipped away into the night, leaving Karen standing in the glow of flashing lights and dying embers. I stayed on my porch the whole time, arms folded, watching the show. Karen saw me eventually. I raised my coffee mug in salute. She didn't wave back. By the time the fire trucks pulled away, the bonfire was nothing but a soggy pile of charred logs, and Karen was left with a stack of fines that could buy a new car. The best part? The deputy made it clear that the fire department would be back the next day to make sure the entire pit was dismantled. Karen could barely muster a goodbye as the last of her guests disappeared into the dark. As I went back inside, I couldn't help but smile. I didn't just stop her. I had let her burn her own plans to the ground. All I had to do was sit back and wait. And tomorrow, when the fire department returned, that bonfire pit wouldn't be standing. But I'd still be here, watching. The next morning, the quiet over the pasture was almost unsettling. The sound of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees felt like nature itself was sighing in relief after the chaos of the night before. I stood on my porch, sipping my coffee, and watching as the fire department's trucks rolled up once again, punctual as ever. Dolores and her crew wasted no time. They marched straight to the half-charred, waterlogged mess that used to be Karen's pride and joy of a bonfire pit. There was no ceremony about it. No drawn-out process. They just got to work dismantling every last stone, hauling away debris, and cutting down the string lights still drooping pitifully between two oak trees. The sheer efficiency of it was almost beautiful to watch. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen at first. But as the sounds of power tools and chains clanking reached her house, she finally emerged, looking like she hadn't slept a wink. Gone was the sun hat and the hostess sash. Instead, she wore an old bathrobe and mismatched slippers, hair tied up like she hadn't even tried. She stomped toward the fire crew, arms flailing as if that would somehow slow them down. Dolores barely acknowledged her. "Step back, ma'am," she said with the tone of someone who had no time left for nonsense. Karen stood there, fists clenched, glaring at me from across the field like I had personally orchestrated the downfall of her empire. And in a way I had. Once the crew was done, Dolores approached Karen with a clipboard and a polite but firm nod. "The pit's been removed. We'll be back for a final inspection later this week. Any attempt to rebuild without permits will result in more fines." Karen tried to protest, sputtering about HOA bylaws and community rights, but Dolores cut her off. "The HOA has no authority over private property, especially when the property isn't yours." Karen looked like someone had knocked the wind out of her. She turned toward the few lingering neighbors, perhaps hoping for backup, but they were too busy pretending to check their phones or slowly walking away, pretending they hadn't even seen her. Over the next few days, the fallout was nothing short of delicious. Whispers spread like wildfire, ironically enough, about the bonfire disaster. It turned out more neighbors than I expected were quietly cheering me on. Paul from 2 doors down actually baked me a pie as a thank you. Others who had previously kept their heads down when Karen walked by were suddenly waving at me on my morning walks and chatting like old friends. One even said, "It's about time someone stood up to her." Apparently, Karen's antics had been building resentment for years, and I had just provided the spark for everyone else to finally step out of her shadow. Things took a turn when I heard through the grapevine that the HOA was holding an emergency meeting. Word was, Karen's role as treasurer and unofficial social committee overlord was on shaky ground. By the end of the week, it was official. Karen was ousted. The HOA sent out a meek little newsletter announcing that, due to recent events, Karen Morrison will be stepping down from her positions. I couldn't help but notice the announcement didn't even bother to sugarcoat it with a thank you for her service. That told me everything I needed to know about how the neighborhood really felt about her. Karen's response was predictable. For the next few days, she doubled down, storming around her yard, muttering under her breath, and shooting me dagger eyes whenever we crossed paths. But then, just as suddenly, a bright red "For Sale" sign popped up on her front lawn. Not a word was spoken, no grand goodbye. Just the sign standing there like a silent surrender flag. By the end of the month, Karen was gone, her house listed as a motivated seller situation on the real estate websites. I could have left it at that, but there was still one thing I needed to do. That vacant spot where the illegal fire pit used to be? I turned it into a garden. Not just any garden, but the most ridiculous, colorful, over-the-top flower garden you've ever seen. Sunflowers, roses, marigolds, snapdragons, every color imaginable. I even added a small wooden sign that read Karen's Memorial Garden for fires that never should have started. Some neighbors laughed when they saw it. Others just smiled knowingly. A few even helped me plant it, like they were all too happy to put the past behind them with a bit of fresh soil and new beginnings. There was something poetic about it all. Karen had tried to light up the neighborhood with a party no one wanted, and in the end, she left behind nothing but fines, embarrassment, and an empty house. Meanwhile, I got a garden, a community that finally found its voice, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I hadn't stooped to her level. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just let her own recklessness do the work. Watching those flowers bloom every spring would be the sweetest reminder of all. And so, life returned to normal, or, at least, a new and improved version of it. The HOA, now run by less power-hungry folks, actually listened to the community for once. Neighbors who had barely waved at me before now stopped to chat, and without Karen looming over everything, it felt like the whole neighborhood had taken a deep breath and finally relaxed. As for me, I just kept tending to my garden, watching the flowers grow where chaos once tried to root itself. And every time I saw a new blossom open, I couldn't help but smile, remembering how a single match nearly ruined everything, but in the end it only lit the path to something far better.